All right, thank you, Father, for everybody gathering today. Keep everybody safe out there in the diaspora. Thank you for waking up Israel, and thank you for your Shabbat. In whose name I pray, amen. Amen. All right, I have no idea what we're talking about. Hopefully
Are you recording? Again, I don't see the dot on my screen like I usually do.
Got you covered. I can't help that on that end, but I got it here.
Just want to make sure.
We're good. Yep. Thank you, sir.
So today we're going to be talking about the Nephilim of Genesis 6, as you requested.
Yay.
And somebody also said that the helmet I had last week needed bigger holes. So this one's got different variety of larger, the cosmic antenna. Since we'll be talking about...
John, do you mind turning off your camera, please? Just touch the icon that looks like a camera. Just touch it once.
There you go. Okay, so the request was to talk about Genesis 6 because the title of this, maybe just a short series here of a few weeks, Demons, Nephilim, Aliens, Oh My. So we talked a little bit about Isaiah 13 last week with the aliens, and Genesis 6 is where the disclosure, the discussion of Nephilim comes from. So actually, if you look in the Hebrew text, it says in Genesis 6 verse 9, it says Parashah Noach. So the word Parashah, here they have Parashas, it's spelled Peresh Shin Tav, just so you know, because we're talking about the language. This whole study is specifically about what are these words actually. So Peresh Shin Tav, well, if it ends in a Tav, why do they transliterate it? Para, Peresh, Shah, that's the Shin, S. So one variety of pronunciation is that the letter Tav, like if you've ever seen on a synagogue, Beth Shalom, say, for example. Well, Beth, B-E-T-H, is actually spelled Bet Yod Tav, Bet. But they'll pronounce it or they'll write it here as Bess, B-E-I-S maybe. So what I'm saying is the letter Tav can validly be pronounced as either a T, a TH, or an S, depending on what your linguistic culture is. So within the Jewish realm, there's a difference between Ashkenazi and Sephardic. Just so you know, Ashkenaz is what's referred to as the kind of what we might think of as the Eastern European, having something to do with Khazaria, which has to do with a region of Turkey up near the Ukraine that gets into ancient history. Well, history from about 1,000 years ago or so. But anyway, the Sephardic is more what you'd call Latin. So it's kind of a different cultural, besides just the pronunciation, they do things differently. Maybe different calendars, different regard of when a day starts, or things like that. So anyway, just so you know, Parashas Noach. Well, if you look at it, says Nun Het. There's no Vav. So is it Nach? Noach. Well, that's what we would commonly in America refer to as Noah, spelled in English N-O-A-H. But here, so just so you can see the letter Het, they spell with a C-H, and I never do that. I write capital C, lowercase x.
Yeah.
Somebody's mic is open. There you go. Anyway, the idea that right in the middle of chapter 6, well, verse 9, it's going to start Parashah Noah. Well, a parashah is like a chapter division. So there's four different types of divisions within the text. There's the book itself, in this case it's Bereshit, otherwise known as Genesis. And then you've got the chapters and verses. And I was discussing with someone.
Joe, can you please shut off your camera? Thanks.
I was discussing with someone a few days ago about the concept that the KJV, like a guy named Michael Hoggard was saying, the King James is the pure truth rightly divided. And he was doing a talk some years ago saying the authorized chapter divisions and verse classifications, numbers, which verse number, all had to do with this other sort of esoteric meaning hidden knowledge, hidden value in the numbering system of the verses. And he thought that or he was promoting that the King James was exclusive in that domain. Well, the parashah is another type of division, which the English doesn't have. So the parashahs, plural parashah, plural parashahs or parashat, are what's read each week, transcending, you might say, the chapter limitations. And so here it starts right in the middle, just so people know. But my point is, if that's the case, then here, starting a certain theme at verse 9 doesn't necessarily mean that where the chapters are divided starts a certain theme. So here in chapter 6, verse 1, it says, "And it came to pass when man began to increase upon the face of the ground, and daughters were born to them." Well, weren't daughters born to them originally? Like, weren't Cain and Abel, okay, the first, or at least the only two children mentioned, born to Adam and Eve, Adam and Hua? Cain killed Abel, and then he went out and married somebody. Married who? That's always been a question. So you back up into chapter 5 of Genesis, and it starts off, well, let's back up to the last couple verses of chapter 4. It says, Adam, this is Genesis 4, verse 25. Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son and named him Seth, because God has provided me another child in place of Abel, for Cain had killed him. And as for Seth, to him also a son was born, and he named him Enosh. Then to call in the name of Yahweh became profaned. To call in the name of Yahuwah became profaned. Well, see, it says in the verse before that, 23, it says, "And Lamech said to his wives, Ada and Zillah, hear my voice." Well, where did Ada and Zillah come from? Well, there's obviously women. So what I'm saying is, you can't just read the narrative text as we have it and figure that it's giving us all the information, or that it's necessarily in chronological order. In fact, I've heard it said by people who study these things that the stories that are laid out in the Torah, not necessarily chronological in sequence or in timing, but they're placed in the order because of the concept of the event, what's being taught. So you'll have the Exodus, and then Amalek attacks. Well, did they attack right then, or did they attack some other time? Or was a story plugged in for the regard as you're reading, that all of a sudden you regard this other matter? Again, nobody knows. It's open to some degree of debate. So then, besides then the order of the stories being questionable, it says, then began to call in the name of Yahweh became profaned. So that's the last word of chapter 4. So you look here in the Hebrew, it says, see, if you don't know how to read, part of me doing this is so that you can recognize things. So if I'm looking at the last phrase of verse 25, 26 in chapter 4, the last word is Yahweh, then it's B'Shem Yahweh, then it says Lakra. So it's Lakra B'Shem Yahweh. That's to call on name, with name, Yahuwah. So then you back up to the next word, and it's He Vav Chet Lamed. And then before that is Aleph Zion, which means then at that time. And then before that, it's the word spelled Aleph Nun Vav Shin. And before that, it's Shemo. Well, Shemo is his name, right? The Vav suffix means his. Shem is name. Enosh, well, that's that. At that time, and then so the word profaned has to be Hevav Het Lamed. Well, you look up Het Lamed, and it means profane, vulgar, desecrated, to make something common, to punch holes in, to drain something out, to empty it. So it's the word for flute, which is the hollow instrument with holes in it. It's a priest of illegitimate descent, and a priest denied the priesthood. And it's to start something new. And it's like, well, that would be Het Lamed or Het Lamed Lamed. And it's like, well, wait a second. All that is what had to do with Yahusha. Or Yeshua, he was the high priest, denied the priesthood. He was of questionable descent. Nobody could prove who his father really was. He got holes punched in and wounded to death, drained out his blood, castigated his reputation, accused him of being the infidel, hung up with thieves, see the company, vulgarized, profaned. So Het Lamed, I always think of Het Lamed or Het Lamed Lamed actually to be ruined, destroyed. Well, if you talk street talk, vulgarity out of your mouth, see, it also just means common. In other words, it's not kadosh, it's common. So when Yahuwah said, you're to be my Am Kadosh, my set apart people, don't eat certain food. Well, someone had brought up the fact the other day that when Noah came out of the ark, it says right there that all that lives, everything that lives is food for you. That includes pork. That includes shellfish. That includes anything that's alive. But then what Elohim said to his people, Israel, he said, I'm set apart, therefore you're to be set apart. So I'm telling you, you, my people Israel, do not eat. And they gave a list of specific birds and animals and types of sea creatures. Don't eat any reptiles. He didn't say you'll die if you eat them. He said you'll abominate yourself. You'll become distorted. The word for cancer or tumor is to be thick and something blocked and the cells aren't functioning right. And that could actually be read as the meaning of that word. So one of the big complaints Yahweh has against his priests of Israel is that they don't teach the people the difference between the kadosh and the halal, the sacred and the profane, or the set apart and the common. So Yahuwah wants us to be set apart, distinguished, special, unlike the norm. But this word halal, though it means profane and vulgar, it also just means common. So you could read this then at that time of Enosh to kra, kufresh aleph, is that to call out or is that learn to read? Kufresh, like his Vayikra is the first word of the book of Leviticus. It's spelled Vav, Yod, Kufresh, Aleph. Vayikra. It's translated, and he called. But if you look at the Hebrew text, there's a little tiny Aleph in the normal sized letters, Vav, Yod, Kufresh. Why is that? Again, it's anybody's guess. So my thinking was, well, if the Aleph is written diminished, real tiny, what if you could drop the Aleph off, and now you have Vav, Yod, Kufresh. Well, Vav is the prefix letter that means and. It's a connector, and it also can mean but or although or if the case when. It's this connecting concept because Vav is a nail or a hook, Velcro to attach to what was previous, and that's the beginning. That's the first letter of the book of Leviticus, so it's to be attached to numbers. The point is, Yod Kuf Resh means to make something precious, dear, rare, costly. of a new regard, of being highly valuable. Kufresh Aleph is to learn how to read. So my take on this deciphering is to say, Vayikra is translated, and he called. The Vav is the and, Yod prefix, he will, he did, he is, and then Kufresh Aleph, call. So if you read the first letter of the first word of the scroll of Leviticus, and he called, that's where your mind is. Who called? Well, it must have been Elohim. But if you read it that he's saying he summoned, because to call means to summon or invite to a meeting. Mikra Kodesh is the sacred gatherings, which are coming up. In fact, on one calendar regard, in less than 10 days is going to be Yom Teruah from today. So that's a Mikra Kodesh. It's a sacred or a set apart, a call gathering. But Kara also means to learn how to read Hebrew. Learn how to read. Doesn't mean Hebrew per se, but that's the sacred Shafah Kodesh. So to learn how to read, in my thinking, in my book, has to regard Hebrew because that's what they had. And when Adam was told, name the animals, how did he do that? He must have been given a basic understanding of the language. What language? It would have to be Hebrew. Was he given each letter? He would have had to in order to assemble the letters in such a way as to form words. And if he was given the letters in concept, the question is, was he given the letter shapes? Did he know how to write? Nobody knows. That's an intellectual consideration. You know, I've sat around before with some friends and talked about that. And you could say, well, is it possible to speak without having letters? You have the sounds. You have distinguishings between what you might think of are phonetic sounds, but if you only had phonetic sounds, would you necessarily think of them as letters per se? Well, not necessarily, because there's languages such as Iziri in Nigeria, or up until a few years ago, they had no letters. Flemish has no letters. If you put letters to it, it's no longer Flemish. It's some, might sound like it. You might be able to think you can read it, but so what I'm saying is that you don't have to have letters per se, but you'd certainly have sounds, phonics. And to spell words is to assemble the phonic sounds together, which we think of as letters, but they didn't necessarily have to have the letters back then. So the invention of the alphabet, if Moshe at the burning bush incident we've talked before, Hasna, if he's the guy that assembled this orthography to the sound, to the meaning, broke open this whole alphabet thing, that was a huge step in, you might say, civilized cultural development. But back here, if you look in Genesis 5, when it says, name him this, because, so when we see in Genesis 4:25, Elohim has provided me another child. Let's name him Seth. Why? Because he has provided me another child to take the place of Abel. Was there any other children be born between the time of the Cain and Abel incident and Seth? Doesn't say. Was there daughters born? Doesn't say. Were there other human type of people invented, created, fabricated? Doesn't say. Adam is a unique, let's call him a creation. He was formed by the hands of Elohim out of clay and then breathed life into him. Adam. Yeah, but what about the Neanderthal? What about various other Let's pretend for a minute that the anthropologists who claim to have found skeletons of various, let's just call them forms or types of pseudo-human. Let's suggest for a bit that they're correct, that there are different types of humanoid, biped, human, I mean, a head like a human with a cranium and arms, 2 legs, and torso walking upright. And if they're correct, are all those the same as Adam? Well, how do we know? I'm getting into a couple different things here. Let me back up to Seth. What does the word Seth mean? She named him Seth because another child was provided in place of Abel. So the word Seth must have something to do with being put in place. Well, you look at the dictionary meaning Adam. Aleph is a prefix letter meaning I am or I will, so it's self-referential. And then Dalet Mem is the word for silent or likeness. And it's also the word for blood. You look in the dictionary, Aleph Dalet means vapor. Well, my mind says, well, breath is a vapor. So there's something about Adam's, he was made in the likeness of Elohim, but he's composed of breath and blood. And we're told in other scripture that life is in the blood. Well, you stop breathing and you're not going to be alive either. So there's something about that which causes Adam to live is this breath and blood. There's something about that. Now, you could say, so what? That's just Bible talk. There's this concept that the court system, the economic, political power, which is a fiction, can only engage with other fictions. So they, because they don't exist, a corporate fiction, corporate entity has to create other corporate entities to relate with, because there's some law, I don't know who made up the law, but some law says you can't blend fiction with nonfiction. Well, if Adam, being the likeness of Elohim with breath and blood, is fiction, I mean, is nonfiction, is the only nonfiction, then the fiction which is fake has to be invented. Well, how do you compare one to the other? So somebody came up with a big idea, write the name in all capital letters. If it's an all capital letter name, it's a fiction. So if you, and when I first heard about this 20, 30 years ago, it's like, what, really? If you look at every legal document, your name is written in capital letters. The name of a state, of a country, of a corporation, even if they write it in lowercase letters on legal documents, it always has to be written in all caps, all capital letters, which means it's a legal fiction, which means that's a, what some people call a straw man or a fake representative, like an idol, an icon of sorts that represents the real one. Well, no, it doesn't represent. The real one represents the fake one. The fake one doesn't represent the real one. In other words, there's a, it's like a what you call a one-way mirror or two-way mirror, in that when you're born, just like you, when you build a ship, it's at the birth, B-E-R-T-H, but if you're born, you're B-I-R-T-H. Same word, sound, but different. So on the your all capital letter name is birthed, B-E-R-T-H, as a ship on the high seas of commerce. Okay. Well, if you don't know about that, it's like, what are you talking about? I'm talking about the difference between fiction and nonfiction, the difference between kadosh and halal, the difference between Adam and something that's not Adam, that may look human, appear human, be considered human, but isn't human. Well, those don't exist. No, they don't exist in our mind because we're taught that they don't exist. But do they exist? Did they exist? Well, nobody knows. Well, did Did dinosaurs exist? Well, there's their bones. Tyrannosaurus rex, Brontosaurus, Brachiosaurus, Triceratops. And yet I know somebody, this fellow went to a different type of church than I went to, and he said, my God wouldn't have invented animals that eat each other like that. They're mean. Just not right. So therefore, they believe the devil invented the dinosaurs. What? Listen, in my thinking, an animal is not just, hey, look, see what it looks like? It's got a big mouth with sharp teeth like a Tyrannosaurus rex. But the brain is wired to the eyeballs and the saliva glands and the ability to run and hunt and grab. And a heck of a lot of stuff goes into creating an animal. And if you know animals, if you know the difference between a chicken and a duck and a dog and a cat, they all have different personalities. And then each individual within the species has a different personality. They're not all the same. You can have a bunch of chickens and they act differently. Some are nice to you, some don't care about you, some are acting this way and that way. And it's like, who would have thunk? So the Elohim, the mind of the powerful one who invented each animal, each species, and then the individuals, wow, that's a job. And for me to think, oh yeah, the devil did that, it's like, get out of here. I'm not even going to tolerate that thought. So in my book, the Elohim of creation created all of creation, including the dinosaurs. But not to the SDAs, or at least I don't know if the denomination at large believes that, but certainly this elderly man who I have respect for believed that. That's what he told me. So it's like, well, where's the reality? I have no idea what the reality is. So I can choose to believe my own reality. So if I choose to believe that Adam is not only unique amongst all the creation, but Adam, translated man, referred to as human, is at the pinnacle, the epitome, the archetype of all of creation. So if I talk about being a human being, I'm talking about being a living, breathing man. Wrong. What? Legally, these guys that run the words and the court system and the political infrastructure have a few dictionaries. Marge Simpson, what was her last name? Cartoon. Bouvier. There's the Bouvier Legal Dictionary and there's the Black's Law Dictionary. They have determined what words mean in the official system of the, let's just call it the Roman, British, American system of laws and courts and economics. And they've determined that the word human literally means monster. So if you claim to be a human being, you're claiming to be a monster, which is not Adam. So if your capital letter name is considered to be the identity of that fictional legal character that they're allowed to engage with, and you claim to be a monster, well, you're not allowed to. A monster isn't given any credibility of having thought, of having sentience, of being logical. So you have to be represented by an attorney because you're a monster. Just saying, never claim to be a human. Well, then what do you got left? What words did Yahweh give us? Adam. You can claim to be Adam, but are you? What does it mean to be Adam? You can claim to be Israel, but are you? You see, if I realize what's really going on in the world these days, and when I would say the Roman, British, American system, I could even say Greco-Roman, British, American, that's zeroing in. But what about the rest of the world? What about the Eastern, the Oriental? This Greco-Roman is considered Occidental, but what about the Oriental? And it's like, They got their own things going on. And there's some kind of blending, but I'm just basically being oxycentric, you might say, not to abandon the Oriental, the Eastern thought, but I'm just saying my whole identity of culture and figuring out how things work has been this primary, what's called Greco-Roman, otherwise known as maybe Latin. But Rome is not just the Vatican or the city in Italy, or what used to be an empire. There was the Holy Roman Empire, which was the Christian Empire, and they took over Britain, and then their laws. You see, if you look at the statue of Nebuchadnezzar's dream in Daniel chapter 2, head of gold, that was referred to as Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. Arms and chest of silver, that was Media Persia. You might say the abdomen, the torso of bronze was Greece, and then the legs of iron is Rome. And then you've got feet, and the toes were iron mixed with clay. Well, see, if you look at that statue and say, well, each kingdom overtook the other one. If Nebuchadnezzar is the head of gold, and he was the greatest, and like gold is above all the other metals of value, of usability, and then silver, not as valuable as gold, but the word silver has to do with arms has to do with economics and military. Is the head the intelligentsia? What came out of Babylon? You have to look back and say, is this just a pictures telling us, well, Babylon was taken over by Media Persia, you got Darius and Cyrus and all these, famous guys that are mentioned in the Bible. Then Alexander the Great of Greece, the Macedonian, he took over Media Persia, Thermopylae there with the Spartans. And then you've got Rome took over Greece or assimilated somehow. And then you've got the Antiochus Epiphanes and all that stuff going on with Ptolemy and Seleucids, the Greek generals that took over after Alexander. So we're just looking at history. Well, who took over Rome? Nobody. Rome split in half like the two legs. And so you had Western Rome, or the Roman Empire ruled by Rome on the western side, but then Constantine moved the capital to the east, and what Constantinople became Byzantium. Byzantine Empire became what's now Istanbul. Same city. And there was just different history and conquering and this and that going on, but Rome is still basically in power. Well, then what are these feet of iron, Roman, mixed with clay, and then this rock comes out of nowhere, not hewn with human hands or not with human armed aggression is what I think it says. That rock hits the feet of the iron mixed with clay, and the whole statue topples over and crashes and is turned to dust, and the wind blows the dust, and it's never heard from again. Wait a minute, is that the end of the world? No, it's the end of the world as we know it. So if it's just a list of kingdoms, boom, 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 this one followed by that one, but what if that towering giant statue is an amalgamation, a blending? What did Babylon contribute to the world that was supplemented by Media Persia, that was supplemented by Greece, supplemented by Rome, and yet Roman rule hasn't been conquered, so it's still politics and religion, like the two legs. And from what I understand, Islam, the development, the design, the promoting Muhammad, that all came out of Rome. Had to do with the Christian stuff back in 600. You can look that up, but that means both Christianity and Islam came out of Rome. Christianity and Islam both came out of Rome. That could be the two legs. But then what is these feet of potsherds? That's clay, that's Adamah, that's earth clay mixed with legal fiction. Well, that's, in my thinking, that's kind of like democracy. And I've heard the phrase all through the 1960s and 70s, making the world safe for democracy. Well, when you had monarchs ruling, democracy was the voice of the people, which was a rebellion against the monarch. The idea of the French Revolution, American Revolution, Russian Revolution, destroying the empire, that was a crime against God, who had placed those kings in power. And to say the voice of the people was tyranny. It's only when the American culture became pervasive over the world, that democracy started being pretended to be a good thing, a better thing than the monarchy, or a better thing than empire. So though it may not be in our consciousness, this thing about the voice of the people, democratic rule, majority voice, well, the Greeks had something about that, but it wasn't a democratic republic. Iron mixed with clay looks like, to me, a democratic republic. Well, if that's true, then this stone hitting the feet is our days, at least since the late 1800s, 1700s, since those days of the revolutions, 1900s, and here we are, 2023. So when Nebuchadnezzar had that dream, and he had been pondering, gee, what's going to happen after me? And Elohim gave him this dream that Daniel interpreted. He says, he showed you what's going to happen. So for us to say, well, why us? Why now? It's like that dream was from Elohim. It's to be trusted. It's to be able to look at it and have insight as to, hey, what's going on? And then there's this little rock that hits the feet, and the statue falls over, turns to dust, is blown away by the wind. But then the rock becomes a mountain, and it says it fills the entire earth, and its sovereignty will not yield to another. In other words, it's not going to be taken over by, we'll get back to Genesis 6, hang on. So here we have the expected future in front of us. If we think that the world's all of a sudden going to blow up and put an end to things, can't, because the little stone has to hit the feet, knock the statue over, and then fill the whole world. And I've heard, when I was a kid, I heard it said, well, that's Jesus coming back. Wait a minute, I thought when he comes back, he's going to take us all up to heaven and we're going to live there. Well, if this is a picture of Jesus coming back and building his kingdom on the earth, why is it that no Christian believes he's going to establish his kingdom on the face of the earth? But who said that stone is that? Somebody said that. It doesn't mean that's what it is. In other words, somebody invented this idea of this reality that they're running with, and then they have to fit everything in. Their whole paradigm of reality has to fit given a few things that they're taken as given, as fixtures of a given. So if somebody were to say the world's going to end by spaceships coming in and attacking, and the humans are going to be, no, it can't, unless that's the little stone coming in, but it says it fills the whole world. So the study of saying, well, what's the word stone? Eben, Aleph-Bet Nun. Aleph is a prefix letter, I will or I am. Nun is a suffix letter to be engaged in some kind of action. What is betness? Aleph-Bet is the word father. Bet Nun is the word son. So it's a combination of father and son, but the word father is also to have this desire, this passion about doing something. And the doing something is engaged in this action, Nun, but what is bet? And then Yeshua, being the primary example of us, he says, I only do what I see my Father doing, and I only say what I hear my Father saying. And remember when he was baptized, this is my beloved Son, this voice from heaven. So for the Father to say, I am happy to lay claim to this one, and the heart of this one being expressed is, I just want to make my Father happy. I want to do what he asked me to do. My whole intention is to be about his stuff. Then I can read into the word stone, Aleph-Bet Nun, that's that. Well, what does it mean to be B'nai Elohim? What does it mean to be B'nai Israel? What does it mean to be Bat Yah, daughter of Yah? Well, see, the word B'nai or Benim is translated my son, B'nai, Bet Nun Yod. Bet Nun is son, S-O-N, and Bet Nun Yod, Yod then is a suffix, means my son. So Benny, Benny in the jet. Benny, B'nai is my son. Benim is plural. That's actually the masculine plural, Benim. But Benot, Bet Nun Vav Tav, that's also plural, but that's the feminine plural. So you'll see here, we'll look at this in Genesis 6, about the daughters of men is Benot Ha-Adam. The daughters, Benot, Ben. Wait a minute, I thought Bet Tav was daughter. I'm trying to show you the way the language is built. Bet Nun can mean son, but Bet Nun Vav Tav should be a feminine suffix. its daughters. Why didn't they, if Bet Tav is daughter, why didn't they call him Betat or Betot? I don't know why. That's the way the language works. I'm just trying to give you this overview. Now, let's go back to talking about Seth. I remember Brad Scott said, 20 years ago, if you look at the names in Genesis 5 of the patriarchs of, you might say, the forefathers, and if you know what the words mean in Hebrew, it tells a story. And then I heard somebody else say, well, Brad Scott didn't come up with that. Jews of ancient time noticed this, and it's whether it's a Jewish thing or just anybody who reads the Bible can figure out what the words mean. And so, hey, let's just read them as a sentence. So the word Adam means likeness, vapor and breath, or breath and blood. Not exactly breath, it's vapor and blood. You'd say his life is but a vapor. It's here, then gone. Different, it's like, where do your mind go? The word Seth literally means buttocks. My ass, what are you talking about? Why would you name your son that? Because it also means foundation and basis. Put, placed, stay. Shin Tav Vav Yod means to drink or to become intoxicated. So intoxicated, you fall and you sit down and you can't get up. Warp, weave, woven, and texture. Well, if you drink alcohol, your consciousness becomes woven with the alcohol and it starts getting woozy. So there, I'm trying to show you in my thinking of making sense of all these different, what looks like disparate definitions, I can see where they're together. So the foundation becomes blended with something not so concrete when you get drunk. The same word Shin Tav means the word six. It's like six is Shin Shin, but you look in the dictionary, and remember I said the suffix letter Tav can be pronounced as an S. Well, that's like the letter Shin is S or SH. If six is Shin Shin, why would Shin Tav be six? That's the way it works. It can mean the number six. So that if they pronounce the Tav as an S, then you think you're hearing the word Shin Shin, but it's actually Shin Tav. And I'm trying to show you how the language blends, whether you're looking at letters or hearing the sounds, and then you look at the meanings, and it also means bleeding or hemorrhage. Bleeding or hemorrhage, what's that got to do with getting drunk? You fall down and you cut yourself and you get hurt and you start bleeding, maybe. But Adam's name was blood. Dalet Mem is blood. So Shin Tav is that which comes out of the blood. Bleeding, is that the play on words in terms of the idea? Adam's progeny, what comes from blood? Bleeding. Okay, I can see that. I mean, can you see that? I'm just trying to say, can we see how this name plays into that name? And then the next name, and then the next name. And whether Brad Scott was accurate in his assessment of the 10 names, or whether the Jews in studying the words are accurate in their assessment, I'm going to read through. Yes, we're going to talk about Genesis 6, but first look at Genesis 5 because it's going to set up Genesis 6. So if I say Shin Tav, Seth, has something to do with some basic foundation that you build on. Okay, well, he couldn't build on Abel. Abel was killed. He couldn't build on Cain. Cain was a murderer. So Seth was provided, okay, to replace Abel. Looking at names real quick. Kuf Yod Nun is the word for Cain. Well, Kuf is the letter that rises up. If you look at all the letters in the alphabet in the modern Hebrew, Kuf is written above all the other letters. And the word Kum, Kufav Mem, means to rise up, and also means to like drill a hole and stick a post in and plant it in. So Kumi Ori, arise and shine. So Kuf is this rising up, but Yod is a hand, and Nun is this like this lightning bolt shape. So it means like in the word Cain, you can see rise up and strike. Why would you name your son Rise Up and Strike? It's like a rattlesnake or something. And Abel, his name literally means transitory and come to nothing. Why would you name your firstborn son, this guy's going to come to nothing, and this guy's going to rise up and strike him? And it's like, did the names of those two sons end up being what we read because of what they did? In which case, well, that's a name in reference to their story almost after the fact. What were they really called by Adam and Hua? That's the way the names appear. So you don't know. But the fact you can correlate names specifically to individuals is what the Bible is about. That's the way it works. So after Seth, this guy named Enosh, Aleph, Nun, Vav, Shin. Well, Aleph is the prefix letter, I am or I will. Nun, Vav, Shin. Well, take out the yods and vavs, you got Nun, Shin, like the word NASA, to pick up and transport. I will carry something. So you look at Nun, Vav, Shin, Aleph in the dictionary, and the word means carrier, containing a subject, so a theme or a thesis. If you write a doctoral thesis, well, what's it about? Your thesis is the stuff that you're about. Okay, well, what's the theme or the thesis of the Aleph-Beit? The Aleph-Beit is a string of letters. No, it carries a concept. I don't know, it's just a bunch of letters. Well, that's what the study is. Aleph, Nun, Shin means weak or sick. So if we run this back to Adam, Adam is made in the likeness of Elohim, and upon him is the foundation of all this other life of the world, the human life, the Adamic life. But the problem is he can get blended or intoxicated with weakness. He's carrying this theme of an intrinsic failure. The next word is kuf yod nun nun. Well, like I said, the word rise up and strike, or kuf nun is the word for nest. Kana, kuf nun hey is the builder, then thus the owner of the nest. Kuf nun aleph is to be jealous, zealous, or have passion, which is very similar, a synonym with ab, Aleph-Bet, father. Kuf nun nun means to settle or nestle or huddle. Kuf yod nun is fit together, fabricate, or spear. So you could say, well, who's kuf yod nun nun referring to then? Is Adam the one who's the ruler? Well, if Yahweh refers to himself as Kana Shamayim Ve'eretz, maker, thus possessor of heaven and earth, then this can't be referring to the devil. It can't be referring to Adam. Even if Adam was given the job of tending the earth, the maker, thus possessor, the kuf nun hey, is Yahweh Elohim. So you might say the first three words are talking about Adam, and then you drop in this other subject referring to the maker and possessor of heaven and earth. Then you get mem hey lamed lamed aleph lamed. Well, hey lamed is brilliant. Hey lamed lamed is where we get hallelujah. Only it's not hallelujah, it's hallel, giving praise to Elohim. Mem hey can be the place of or away from. That word, if you look it up in the dictionary, it means to mix or adulterate. Mixture or adulterate. It also means to circumcise. Well, why would you get circumcised? To make a distinction of being separate, kadosh instead of halal. So my talk about being sacred or profane, kadosh or halal, goes back to this word. The reason for that was because of this word, who, kinan, in reference to the Creator, wants to be distinctly different. So he tells Abraham and his people, circumcise your male children. And then this word means, well, if it means hallelujah, it means to exalt with distinctly Elohim. How do you exalt Elohim distinctly? Not blended, not mixed, not profane, not common. Then you get this word Yod Resh Dalet, Jared. Resh Dalet, where we get the word road, R-O-A-D, like the street. How do you make a street? You take dominion over nature, you push rocks out of the way, you fill in low places, knock down high places, you stomp, you pound, you crush, you trample, and you pave. That's exactly where we get the word Lord, Lamed Resh Dalet. This is Yod Resh Dalet. It's the same meaning. Descend, flowing down, removed, dominate, beat down. It also means remove honey from the hive. So if you have the dominion, Adam was given dominion. This word was that word in the previous chapters, where it says Adam was given dominion over the earth, over nature. It means to remove honey from the hive. It means to remove bread from the oven. So it also here, it says it means inauguration, consecration, training, education, apprenticeship. Maybe that's the next word, chanok. Anyway, the point is to be given the authority to remove honey from the hive, to descend. Well, for me to think the heavens are above the earth, if this is talking about what the Aleph-Bet letters refer to, I'm thinking, well, Yahusha, he's the guy who came from heaven to earth. So if he came down to dominate humanity, to remove honey from the hive, to take the best of what we have, like stealing honey from the beehives after they do all the labor, flying from flower to flower and bringing it back with the pollen, and they're doing their whole thing. I see this picture of Yeshua leaving the heavenly realm from his father's place, coming to earth, descending, reducing himself, which is also the word dalal, dalet lamed lamed, to become poor and impoverished, weakened. Well, why would he do that? To extract honey from our hive. In other words, I can see within the story that the honey from the heavens risked losing that honey by allowing it to flow down to earth to gather up honeys from here and take them there. And I see in this the parables of the great treasure, the guy who found the treasure in the field, or the pearl of great price, sold everything he had, just go get it. It's like somehow I'm picturing Elohim, by these words, I'm picturing Elohim finding such a value in some humans, some people, some atoms, not humans, they're fiction. Okay, so some atoms who would so appreciate him, look to him, yield to him, that he was willing to risk losing his honey to come down and secure this. Like selling everything you have to buy the treasure in the field. What if it wasn't there? What if it wasn't valuable? What if they changed the currency? Too bad for you. He thought it was worth the risk. This next word, chet nun vav kaf. I think that's the word, yeah, that's where you get the word Hanukkah. Inauguration, consecration, training, education, apprenticeship, in favor, compassion, in order to grant amnesty. And the kaf suffix you could say for you, and chet nun is where we get the word for grace. So in other words, him leaving the heavens to come down to here to teach us is the expression of his grace. Then you get this word mem tav tav vav shin lamed chet. Well, mem tav is death. Shin lamed chet is to be sent out like a missile, or to divorced, or go into exile. So for those who are divorced, sent away, removed, banished, in exile, extended, expeditioner, shulchan, shin lamed chet, if there was a noon at the end, it would be a money changer's table. 5 minutes. A shin lamed yod het is a messenger or agent. Shin lamed vav het, just look at the last three letters, means quick, let loose, or a missile. And so I picture, there's that Roman god named Mercury with wings on his feet, or wings on his helmet, and he's a fast runner, Quicksilver. Speaking of Mercury, the metal, liquid metal. Well, that's a picture of this guy coming from the heavens to the earth as a money changer's table, in order to turn things around, in order to change those banished to those rescued, those lost and bewildered to those redeemed and given light. Then you get the word lamek, lamed mem kaf, which is mem kaf is poor or lowly. Lamed being the prefix for the poor, unto the beaten, wounded, smitten. Well, the first of the Beatitudes is, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So written in here somehow is this message describing the predicament of humanity, this passion that the Creator has, and so he's going to do something to rectify the alienation. And then you get Nun Chet, which is Noah, Nach, rest, comfort, kind, pleasing, quiet. Nun Chet Hey means led, guided, or landing. And then there's the name of the 3 sons of Noah, which are not included in the list of 10 that you normally hear. It's Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Shem, name, fame, renown, designation. It means there, it means existing. It's the branding logo. Hem, Chet Mem, warmth, heat. Chet Mem Hey, anger, wrath, to see or to protect. So it's not that you're just ticked off. It's like, no, I'm going to be furious about protecting what's mine. Well, that's got to be referring to the attitude of Kuf Yod Nun. Kuf Yod Nun Nun, the Kuf Nun Hey, the creator, this possessor. And then you have Japheth, which is Yod Pei Tav. Pei Tav is something opened up, and Ephah, Yod Pei Hey, so Tav would be the suffix ending of what would be the feminine suffix of Yod Pei Hey, which means beautiful. So I could put this together, the likeness of Elohim, breath and blood, placed as a foundation but blended with intoxicating failure. Mortal sorrow, infirmity, weakness, carrying the theme of loss. The master, builder and possessor, passionate with involved interest, obsessed, not willing to share or mix his brilliance with any other. Worthy of praise, he will descend, bring in domination, his favor, your amnesty, willing to scrape the honey out of his hive in order to gain more honeys. His death is for the banished, the exiled, the divorced. He is the agent sent to you who are poor, beaten, humbled, reversing the condition, turning the table. Comfort and rest, kindly teaching your consecration as due. What does it mean to be kadosh? What does it mean to be set apart? What does it mean to be uncommon, not like all the others? The name of renown, proprietary brand. What is Yahweh? What is Aleph Tav? Passionately protected and defended, be put on display for all its beauty. Well, if that's the meaning of the 10 plus 3, 13 names, then that's a statement of, well, why does this world even exist? Why are we here? Who are we that want to be, claim to be his people? And how does that fit in with Genesis 6, which we're going to get to in just a moment after the break?